Welcome to the podcast. This is Concerning Middle Earth. I am Neo. Kristina is not with us today. She's sick. That's okay. We can still break this up. We can still dig into this episode. It's a good one. And this is coming out late because I recorded the whole podcast. I tried recording last night, or I tried recording the other day, and the sound was unusable, and I looked ridiculous. So here we are. Take two. This is not just a podcast. I mean, this is a podcast about Lord of the Rings. We are talking about Rings of Power. We will continue talking about other things Middle Earth after the show, after season one ends. This episode starts with Arondir uh, being dragged to this orc camp, whatever this is, and I think being chained up. I have to say that I love the orcs. They are so good. They look, especially because orcs and goblins, that kind of monsters like that, have been done so ridiculously for the past 30, 40 years in film that it's always kind of a joke. Like fantasy stuff is always a joke until Lord of the Rings changed that with the way they did orcs. And then with The Hobbit, they tried going digital, and I think that was a mistake. And now with this show, they've gone back to practical prosthetics, and I think these orcs are top notch. It's very short. Then it goes back to Halbrand and Galadriel, who are aboard a Lindel ship, which I thought it was going to be Isildur's, but Isildur is still in some kind of sea fair sea training to work on a ship. I don't know, but Elendil seems like he is in the appendix, or I think, or well, anyways, his history, because I did tons of research. He is a very interesting character, and a lot does happen. So I think in this episode it does come out that his allegiance is he is very much for Numenor, but he is also conflicted a little bit because with Galadriel being there with this elf, because they say in the show his name means elf friend. Right from the start, I think I'm I'm very concerned about Halbrand and where his story's going. I don't particularly like his character. Uh, Not that it's poorly acted or anything. I think the actor is great. I think the character they've written is a little cliche, maybe. Um, I don't like that he has an attitude, and it's yeah. Someone had a great theory online about Halbrand because he's from the Southlands, and Theo, which I think we already floated this idea that maybe he's Theo's father. But what? So the theory goes: what if Halbrand be he swears allegiance to Elendil, because he supposedly according to Galadriel, she thinks he is a king. Theo, the boy with the knife who found the the Mordor, the evil knife, uh, grows up to become the Witch King of Agmar. So if Halbrand swears an allegiance to Elendil, and then he breaks his oath because he doesn't want to fight his own son, who is now the Witch King of Agmar. It's a very interesting theory. I would I wouldn't be surprised if it went in some direction like that. I think everyone's thinking that maybe Halbrand is that Theo is his son, but we'll see. They then they sail into Numenor, and Numenor is a very fascinating um, part of Middle Earth that, as much as we do learn about it from the books and all that, it's still very brief. It's like Atlantis because it eventually sinks into the sea and just sort of becomes like a myth. But it's a real place in Middle Earth on the Western Shores. Whatever. Blah blah blah. The music. Kristina didn't like the music that much. The theme of Numenor, which is sort of it is not Middle Eastern. It does have a it's hard to pinpoint the sound, but sort of they do have sort of a Greek feel to the buildings and the design and everything, and it's great. And there's color, and I do love the design. The city itself, I guess, because it is an island city and is built around these all the water and bays and whatnot, that it is a very broken up city, and it does not all go to a peak, a pinnacle, like here's the big um, the the palace is not at the top of the city. I mean, it is and isn't, but it's very spread out. The whole city is very spread out on different hillsides going into the water, which looks really cool. I don't know if anyone noticed, but it did have a Gondor um, look and reference with that part of the city that kind of jutted out, like kind of like Minas Tirith has, which I thought was really cool. Um, Seeing as people of Gondor are descendants of Numenor. Halbrand did have a line that stood out to me, which I thought was fascinating, where he said he's like, I didn't know that men like me built such cities or structures, whatever. It's basically he was in awe of what of Numenor, of what they had built there, because he comes from the Southlands. He comes from a little village. He's never seen this kind of thing, and you forget that there. It's a fantasy world. There's no internet. There's no phones. If you live in a place and you never travel, that is your world. That's all you know. So, I like that something like that was not lost on the characters, or him at least, because Galadriel's been everywhere. This episode did get a little political, which I'm not a big fan of. Maybe that's why I don't like Game of Thrones. There's a Game of Thrones reference. But we did get to meet the Queen of Numenor, and I was confused when um, she went up to the tower because there was reference to her father, but it sounded like he was still alive, and then she went and she talked to him, but the camera never even hinted that he was actually there, or it was very if if he was there, I feel like they would have teased it with a different shot, like maybe even just like a real low angle, like you could just see a bed but you couldn't see who's laying in or something. It just because how do we know maybe she's not just talking to like an urn of ashes? It did feel odd, and I think the first time I watched it, I didn't even realize she was supposed to be talking to her father. She's got a great costume, great headpiece. It's very sea themed. Yes, overall, I love the design of Numenor, and I think Christina liked it too. Then and now the whole little trick Hallbrand, yeah, he has some dumb lines where he's like kneel, and he's like, oh, kneel, and then like, no, nobody kneels in Numenor, and like Galadriel should know better than to listen to him. She should know whether she needs to kneel or not. She's an elf. She's been around. He has not. So that I felt like they did that just to be funny for a joke, even though logically it doesn't work for his character to do that. Then we do get to meet Isildur. Isildur is the one who cuts the ring from Sauron's hand in the last battle of alliance of elves and men, and he's learning to sail, and it's all fascinating. And then his sister comes up, which he does not have a sister. He has a brother in the books, but there's hardly anything said about his brother, so it makes perfect sense to be like, well, let's take that character, let's gender swap it, let's give her an interesting story. I am curious where they're going with that story because that family group there of Valendil and Isildur, and I don't even remember what her name was. I should have written it down. That it's there's I feel like there's gonna be some family drama, and we'll see where it goes. They do get into a little bit of the history of Numenor, but it is very uh, is very. They break it down very simply for the viewers because it gets very complicated if you start reading. The Numenorians helped get rid of Morgoth, and so the Valar gifted them this island. I believe they brought it up out of the sea. Anyways, for them, I believe they also blessed the Numenorians with long life, which is down the line they become the Dunedain. I will read you this. So, the Valar were the powers of. Okay, anyways, the Valar were all these powerful beings that helped shape Middle Earth when Middle Earth was created. Morgoth was one of them until he turned to evil. Elendil, elf friend, was a man of Numenor who led the survivors of its downfall to the shores of Middle Earth, where they founded the two realms in exile, Arnor and Gondor. Thus, Elendil became the first king of both realms and held the title of first High King of the Dunedain, which is Aragorn was one of the Dunedain. Yes, and they were blessed with long life. That's why Aragorn lived to be like 100 million. No, 100, I don't know, 50 or something. Anyways, Halbrand goes on his own thing where he's trying to get work and he ends up trying to trick the blacksmiths into getting one of their little sigils that they wear, their little brooches, because he wants to work with them, and then he ends up beating them up. It's just it again. I don't know what his motives are, and Galadriel seems to think he is the lost, or not the lost, but he is the king of the Southlands, which is odd. I didn't know they had a king, but we know that most of the Southland people side with Sauron again, I believe. So then Galadriel and Elendil go riding to the this tower where the records are of Numenor, and that's where they. Oh, she realized it was help designed by the Elros. Something I can't quite remember, but was part of setting all that up. Who is Elrond's brother, which I did not catch the first time watching it. The mark that she finds at the first episode when she pours the water on the stone and it all crystallizes is not like some dark sigil, but it is a map of the Southlands. Morgoth and Sauron had this whole plan set up that if he was defeated, he had a successor, which was Sauron. So they get a little glimpse into his plan. Then we do get to go back and we get to see the Harfoots and their celebration. It was I was a little bit confused. They were like honoring the dead the hobbits that got left behind who didn't make it. Some of them died by landslide and wolves and snow. And we discover that what happened to Poppy's family and why she's all alone, which was sad. Nori has to get the page from Sadok's giant book, and they have this whole comical scene where Sadok's trying to get the book and she's trying to hide, and Poppy comes to help. Anyways, it's fine. It's the Hobbit stuff. Um, it was funny, and then she leaves the page with the star map for the stranger, and when he gets it, he goes to next to one of their fires to read it, and that was really funny too because it was like, yeah, I knew the stranger was gonna crash their campsite because that was like the only way to just like ripping off the band-aid. There was no way Nori was ever going to tell them about him. Nori and her family almost get left behind in the caravan because of the whole situation, but eventually they're allowed to go, but they can't. But oh, interesting, Nori, like Ori, Dori, Nori. I mean, that's her nickname, but it's also a dwarf name from The Hobbit. So before the end of the show, we do go back to Arondir and the orcs, and they're digging, and there's this drama about they want to cut the tree down. The orcs want the tree cut down. It's in their path. And oh yes, and I think you kind of forget that orcs do not like sunlight. That's the whole purpose of them digging a tunnel that's covered. And they have a great sequence of fighting and stuff. and the one elf gets his throat slit when he's drinking water because he doesn't protect his throat. I'm just speeding through this because um but I thought it was a great scene other than the warg that they called out. I don't know why that CGI seemed so wrong. And Arondir realizes there is no escape because the one elf who even does get to out of the hole gets shot with arrows. The orcs call for I can't remember what the name they use because in the books it's Anatar, the name for Sauron, and they wonder why Sauron is using an elvish name, but because Sauron puts on like a fair disguise as an elf in the books, and it seems like that's probably where they're going in the show too. In the books, he ends up, well, let's just say the episode ended with you. It was obvious it's Sauron. The gloves he's wearing are all spiky, and they keep him out of focus. And I really wanted to see him, and that's where I freaked out at the end of the episode ending, and them not showing him made me so. It was so frustrating, but hopefully we'll see him soon. So in the books, though, Sauron, in this disguise as an elf, goes to Eregion and befriends Celebrimbor and the elves of Eregion, and teaches them because he's a sorcerer. He teaches them stuff, and I believe he helps with the forging of the rings. And it also mentions that Galadriel and Elrond and Gil-galad all don't quite trust him. They shouldn't. So I think it makes it fascinating. It makes Celebrimbor's character more fascinating that he does trust him. See, now I got to look up and find out what happens to Celebrimbor after all this, because it does seem like maybe his character is set on a potentially very interesting path. Anyways, that's the whole episode. I probably missed stuff, but that was the stuff that I found fascinating about the episode. And um, that's it. Look, okay. If you want to support Ko-Fi Suko Films, you can. I've got links. You can look down below or whatever. And of course, this is a video podcast, but this is also an audio podcast. So it's iTunes, it's Spotify, or it's YouTube at Suko Films. Wherever you want to see it or hear. Until next time, the road goes ever on.